The fact that Beethoven's Fourth Symphony is the least performed of his 9 is at once understandable and arbitrary. The placement of this apparently conventional symphony between his third, the Heroica, which in a single grand gesture revolutionized the genre's scope, and his fifth, which fired the imagination of the Romantics through his use of an organic, tightly argued form of motivic development to suggest a profound extra-musical narrative, has certainly contributed to this work's relative obscurity. And yet the extent to which this symphony's comparative neglect is disconnected from its actual merit is striking. Much like the compulsion to frame Shostakovich's works solely within the context of his struggle against Soviet authoritarianism, the tendency to overlook Beethoven's roots in the aesthetic values of 18th century classicism and cast him exclusively as a convention-shattering revolutionary can impede our ability to understand and appreciate the entirety of his multifaceted creative personality. While the Fourth Symphony's shorter length, Haydnesque orchestration and conventional slow movement stand in contrast to the breadth, sonic opulence, and epic drama that are such distinguishing characteristics of the Heroica, a closer look at this work reveals it to be progressive in itself and a crucial step along the path that led to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and beyond. Although the chronology of Beethoven's symphonies appears to be straightforward, his sketchbooks show that the route from a composition's genesis to its completion was often convoluted and circuitous. In the quest to determine the provenance of works he wrote early in his second creative period, which is conventionally defined as lasting from 1802 to 1814, the so-called Heroica Sketchbook has become particularly important. This volume from 1803 and 04 is not only filled with sketches for the Third Symphony, it also contains ideas for his opera Leonora, later titled Fidelio, the Waldstein Sonata for piano, the Triple Concerto, and the Fourth Piano Concerto. The book also includes sketches for the first and third movements of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and jottings related to the Sixth that refer to his plan to make these works a contrasting pair. When combined with the absence of anything in the sketchbook for the Fourth Symphony and the documentary evidence that it was written in the late summer of 1806, this information reveals that the creative context within which it was written was defined by the same innovative mindset that produced the Fifth and Sixth Symphonies, which were eventually completed in 1808. This chronological awareness allows us to see Beethoven's Fourth not as a retrenchment in the wake of the Heroica, but rather as part of his ongoing musical evolution. The essential progressivism of the Fourth Symphony manifests itself in the work's musical substance. While the symphony's harmonic architecture is derived from the same classical models Beethoven employed throughout his career, the work is replete with examples of his increasing tendency to move suddenly to and from harmonic areas that are distant from a movement's home key, a technique that creates a greater sense of space and evokes the mystical and the exotic. This is apparent from the start, as the expected opening of the symphony in the conventional two-flat key of B-flat major is replaced by music that's functionally in B-flat minor, a tonality with 5 flats that immediately, albeit temporarily, obscures the work's fundamental harmonic identity. In another instance, Beethoven sets an extended series of phrases in F-sharp major, a key with 6 sharps that's 8 steps away from B-flat major on the circle of fifths, thus making the ensuing return of the opening Allegro's theme in the home key particularly satisfying. This use of what the renowned pianist and scholar Charles Rosen called purple patches would become a characteristic feature of Schubert's music and pave the way for the harmonic adventurism of the Romantics. The symphony also contains an important structural innovation, as Beethoven takes the dance movement, which was conventionally laid out in a 3-part ABA form, and adds repetitions to create a more substantial ABABA structure. This formal expansion, which Beethoven would subsequently employ in the original version of his Fifth Symphony as well as in his Sixth and Seventh, takes this lightest of movements and gives it a breadth and substance that changes the relationship between the movements in the traditional symphonic design. Finally, Beethoven's practice of using tightly circumscribed melodic materials to create large-scale structures reaches a new level of intensity in the Fourth Symphony, establishing a precedent for the tersely explosive musical rhetoric that made the Fifth Symphony iconic. Once again, this element appears immediately in the Fourth, as Beethoven renders the bulk of the first movement from two melodic snippets, a half-note couplet in the second bar, and an upward flourish that catalyzes the transition from the slow introduction to the movement's main allegro section. This dynamically rigorous approach to motivic development would become a Beethovenian signature. In his hands, simple melodic patterns become analogous to characters in a novel, who travel through a maze of dramatic experiences before eventually reaching a point of resolution. This ability to craft musical explorations of the infinite from the simplest materials gives Beethoven's art its singular power, and his unique fusion of classical discipline and poetic imagination lies at the heart of his music's enduringly universal appeal.